If you're a woman over 45 watching this, pay attention, because what happened to Dr. Kate Morrison could be happening to you right now. Hit that subscribe button, because this story will make you trust your intuition like never before. And ladies, tell me in the comments, have you ever had a gut feeling that saved someone's life? Because Kate's story proves that women's intuition isn't just a feeling, it's a superpower. Therapist's intuition saves teen patient from deadly mind control experiment. The silence in therapy room 3 stretched like a held breath. Dr. Catherine Morrison sat across from Linda Hartwell, a 52-year-old woman whose hands hadn't stopped trembling since she'd arrived 20 minutes ago. Linda's son had died in a motorcycle accident 3 weeks prior. The grief counseling session should have been routine, but Kate felt something else. Something cold and sharp, pressing against the edges of her consciousness. "I keep thinking about him," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible. "About Tyler. How he used to call me every Sunday morning just to say hello." Kate nodded, maintaining the professional composure she'd perfected over 20 years of trauma therapy. But beneath the surface, her intuition screamed warnings. The way Linda kept glancing toward the window, the finality in her voice when she spoke about her son, the careful way she'd arranged her purse and keys on the side table as if organizing affairs. "Linda," Kate said quietly, breaking protocol, "don't go home alone tonight." Linda's tear-filled eyes snapped up to meet Kate's. "What?" Kate felt the familiar tingle along her spine that had become stronger since Alex died, since her world had shattered 18 months ago. The sensation that told her things she had no logical way of knowing. "I mean it. Call someone, stay with a friend, or..." Kate reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card for the local crisis hotline. "Call this number if you need to talk to someone tonight. Promise me." Linda stared at the card, then at Kate. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, recognition, maybe even relief. "How did you know?" Linda whispered. Kate's professional training warred with the inexplicable certainty flooding her system. She shouldn't have known, but she did. "Sometimes we can sense when someone is carrying more than grief," Kate said carefully. "Will you promise me?" Linda nodded slowly, tucking the card into her purse. "I promise." After Linda left, Kate sat alone in her office at the Willow Creek Trauma Center, watching the late afternoon sun paint golden strips across her desk. The restored Victorian building nestled in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado, had been her sanctuary for 3 years now, ever since she'd abandoned her career as a prosecutor and retreated into the quieter world of healing rather than fighting. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grace Rivera, her 7 o'clock appointment, running late, family meeting. "Will be there by 7:15. Kate smiled despite herself. Grace was 19, but she texted like someone much older. Formal. Careful with words. It came from being raised by people who didn't speak English as their first language, Kate supposed. Or maybe it came from surviving what Grace had survived. Kate used the extra time to review Grace's file, though she practically had it memorized by now. Grace Rivera, age 19. Admitted to Willow Creek 6 months ago after what the intake notes diplomatically called a traumatic family incident. The reality was much harsher. Grace had been the sole survivor when a gang hit had targeted her foster family's home in Denver. 3 adults and 2 younger children had died. Grace had hidden in a closet for 4 hours, listening to the aftermath before neighbors found her. Since then, Grace claimed she could see death coming. Not in a mystical sense, she insisted, but as patterns, behaviors, the way people held their shoulders when they'd given up hope, the specific tone of voice someone used when they were saying goodbye forever. The foster care system had labeled it PTSD with paranoid features. Her current guardians, a well-meaning couple in their 60s, had brought her to Willow Creek when Grace started predicting deaths with unsettling accuracy. Kate had initially approached Grace's case with clinical detachment. Trauma could absolutely heighten pattern recognition. Survivors often developed hypervigilance that appeared almost psychic, but 6 months of sessions had challenged every assumption Kate held about the boundaries between intuition and impossibility. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Grace stood in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater that made her look younger than 19. But her eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Sorry I'm late, Dr. Morrison. The Hendersons wanted to discuss my progress." Grace made air quotes around the word, settling into the familiar chair across from Kate's desk. How did that go? They think I'm getting better because I haven't mentioned death in 3 days. Grace's tone was dry, matter-of-fact. I told them I've learned when to keep quiet. Kate felt a familiar tug of protectiveness toward the young woman. The Hendersons were good people, but they wanted Grace to be normal again. They didn't understand that trauma changed the fundamental architecture of a person. Recovery wasn't about returning to who you were before. It was about integrating who you'd become. Grace, you seem different tonight. More settled, maybe. Grace was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands. When she looked up, her expression was troubled. Dr. Morrison, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When your son died, did you know it was going to happen? The question hit Kate like cold water. She kept her expression neutral through years of practice, but inside something cracked open. What makes you ask that? Because sometimes I get flashes about you. Not death, something else. Guilt, like you're carrying something heavy that isn't really yours to carry. Kate's throat tightened. Alex had called her the night he died. She'd been in a partners meeting at the law firm arguing about billable hours and client strategies. She'd let it go to voicemail. By the time she'd listened to the message, Mom, I'm up on Cathedral Ridge and something feels wrong. The weather is changing fast and I don't know. I just wanted to hear your voice. Alex had already fallen. The official report said equipment failure. A carabiner that shouldn't have broken, but Kate had replayed that voicemail thousands of times, hearing the uncertainty in Alex's voice. He'd sensed danger. He'd reached out, and she'd been too busy to answer. Sometimes, Kate said carefully, we feel responsible for things that were never within our control. But what if they were... Grace leaned forward. What if you could have changed things, but you didn't trust what you were feeling? The words hung in the air between them. Kate felt that familiar tingle along her spine, the sensation that had grown stronger since Alex's death, the feeling that whispered warnings about Linda Hartwell tonight, the same feeling that must have been trying to tell her something the night Alex called. Grace, are you sensing something now, about someone specific? Grace was quiet for so long that Kate wondered if she'd heard the question. Finally, the young woman nodded. You're going to lose someone else. Someone important. In the next 2 days. Kate's blood went cold. Who? I don't know. The image isn't clear. But Dr. Morrison? Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. This time you can stop it, if you trust what you feel. Before Kate could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Morrison, her younger sister. Kate's stomach clenched. Sarah never called unless something was wrong. I need to take this, Kate said, reaching for the phone. Kate, Sarah's voice was thick with tears. Can you come over? I need to tell you something. What's wrong? I can't do this over the phone. Please. I know things have been complicated between us, but I need my sister right now. Kate looked at Grace, who was watching with an expression of sad understanding. I'll be right there, Kate said. After hanging up, Kate gathered her things quickly. Grace remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. Dr. Morrison? Yes. Whatever she tells you tonight, remember that people make choices based on fear sometimes, even people who love us. Kate paused at the door. Grace, how do you know it's about my sister? Grace's smile was gentle and heartbreaking. Because guilt has a particular weight to it. And families, we carry each other's guilt, even when we shouldn't. The drive to Sarah's house took Kate through the winding roads of Boulder's hill country. Fall was settling over Colorado, painting the aspen trees in brilliant gold and orange. But Kate barely noticed the beauty around her. Grace's words echoed in her mind. You're going to lose someone else. Sarah lived in a modest townhouse on the east side of Boulder, a place Kate had visited exactly 3 times since moving back to Colorado. Their relationship had been complicated since Sarah's affair with Kate's ex-husband David 3 years ago. The divorce had been messy. The betrayal had been devastating. But as Kate pulled into Sarah's driveway, she felt something shift inside her chest. The anger she'd carried for 3 years felt suddenly less important than the fear in her sister's voice. Sarah opened the door before Kate could knock. At 49, Sarah still looked younger than her years, but tonight her face was pale and drawn. Her eyes were red from crying. Thank you for coming, Sarah said, stepping aside to let Kate in. The townhouse was decorated in Sarah's typical style. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, photographs of family vacations from their childhood. But something felt different tonight. More final somehow. "Sarah, what's going on?" Sarah led Kate to the living room where 2 cups of tea sat cooling on the coffee table. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them feeling both familiar and heartbreaking. "I went to the doctor last week," Sarah began, her voice barely steady. "I've been having some symptoms. Fatigue, weight loss, some pain." Kate felt her stomach drop. "And pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She stared at her sister, trying to process what she'd just heard. "Stage 4, Kate repeated numbly. "The oncologist says 6 months, maybe less. It's already spread too far for surgery." Kate felt the world tilt around her. First Alex, now Sarah. The sister she'd been angry with for 3 years, the sister she'd pushed away in her hurt and pride, was dying. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Because we haven't exactly been close, Kate. Because the last time we talked, you told me you never wanted to see me again." The memory hit Kate like a slap. 3 years ago, standing in this same living room, screaming at Sarah while David stood behind her with the expression of a man who'd been caught but wasn't particularly sorry. "I was angry," Kate said quietly. "I was hurt and angry and you had every right to be." Sarah's voice broke. "Kate, I need you to know something. About David. About what really happened." Kate felt that familiar tingle along her spine, the warning sensation. But this time it wasn't telling her to be afraid. It was telling her to listen. "What do you mean, what really happened?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "David came to me first, about a year before you found out. He said your marriage was over, that you were already planning to leave him. He said you'd asked him to move out." "That's not true." "I know that now. But Kate, he was so convincing. He showed me what he said were text messages from you talking about how unhappy you were. He said you were waiting for Alex to graduate college before filing for divorce." Kate stared at her sister. "Sarah, I believed him. I thought I was helping you both transition to something inevitable. By the time I realized he'd been lying, manipulating both of us." Sarah's voice trailed off. "I was already in too deep. And then you found out, and I couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth without sounding like I was making excuses." The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah crying. Kate felt 3 years of anger crumbling inside her chest, replaced by something much more complicated. Grief, regret, and a terrible understanding of how David had orchestrated the destruction of their family. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought you'd never believe me. Because I was afraid that knowing the truth wouldn't change how much I'd hurt you." Kate moved across the couch and pulled her sister into her arms. Sarah collapsed against her, sobbing with the exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying a terrible secret for too long. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry for all of it." Kate held her sister and thought about Grace's words. People make choices based on fear sometimes, even people who love us. "We're going to figure this out," Kate said, her own voice thick with tears. "The cancer, the doctors, the treatment options. We're going to fight this together." Sarah pulled back, looking at Kate with hope and disbelief. "You mean that after everything? You're my sister. That's bigger than everything else." They sat together on the couch, Kate holding Sarah while her sister cried 3 years' worth of stored grief and fear. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As the evening darkened, Kate thought about the pattern Grace had described, the way people held their shoulders when they'd given up hope. The specific tone of voice someone used when they were saying goodbye forever. Sarah had been saying goodbye tonight, not just because of the cancer, but because she'd expected Kate to turn away from her again. But Grace had been wrong about one thing. Kate wasn't going to lose someone else. She was going to save her sister. And somehow in the process, maybe they could save each other. Later that night, after Kate had helped Sarah set up appointments with oncologists and support groups after they'd talked through treatment options and logistics, Kate drove home through the quiet streets of Boulder. Her phone buzzed with a text message. From Grace. "I'm glad you answered the phone tonight. Some goodbyes can be turned into hellos if we're brave enough." Kate smiled through her tears. Grace's intuition was remarkable, but it was also young. It saw patterns and endings, but it didn't yet understand the power of forgiveness, the way love could resurrect relationships that seemed dead. But as Kate pulled into her own driveway, that familiar tingle ran down her spine again. Grace had been right about Sarah, which meant she might be right about other things too. You're going to lose someone else. Someone important. In the next 2 days. Kate sat in her car thinking about the conversation she'd had with Grace earlier, about the guilt she carried over Alex's death, about the night she hadn't answered his phone call. What if Grace was right? What if Kate's growing intuition, this ability to sense things she shouldn't be able to know, was a gift rather than a symptom of unresolved grief? What if the next time someone needed her, she was ready to listen? Kate's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number she didn't recognize. Dr. Morrison, this is Linda Hartwell. I wanted to thank you for the card you gave me. Linda, are you okay? I am now. I called the crisis line like you said. I talked to someone for 3 hours. And Dr. Morrison, I don't know how you knew, but you saved my life tonight. After Linda hung up, Kate sat in the darkness of her car processing what had just happened. Twice in one evening, her intuition had guided her to help someone in crisis. First with Linda's suicidal thoughts, then with Sarah's need for reconciliation and support. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe Kate could sense things. Maybe the guilt she carried over Alex's death had awakened something that had always been there waiting. And if that was true, then maybe Alex's death hadn't been meaningless. Maybe it had given her a gift she could use to help others. Kate finally went inside her house, a small cottage in the hills that she'd bought after the divorce. It was peaceful here, surrounded by pine trees and mountain views. But tonight, as she prepared for bed, Kate felt anything but peaceful. Grace's warning echoed in her mind. You're going to lose someone else. Someone important. In the next 2 days. Sarah was safe for now. But who else was in danger? And how was Kate supposed to protect someone when she didn't know who needed protecting? As she drifted off to sleep, Kate made a decision. Tomorrow, she would pay more attention to the warnings her intuition was sending her. She would trust the tingles and the inexplicable knowledge. Because if there was one thing she'd learned tonight, it was that love required courage. And sometimes courage meant believing in things that couldn't be explained. Even if those things seemed impossible. Even if trusting them meant accepting that the world was far stranger and more connected than she'd ever imagined. Kate's last thought before sleep was of Alex's voice on that final voicemail. Something feels wrong. I just wanted to hear your voice. This time she promised silently she would answer the call. The next morning dawned crisp and clear with the kind of crystalline light that made the Colorado mountains look like a postcard. Kate arrived at Willow Creek early, wanting to review her notes before her first appointment. But as she settled at her desk with coffee and case files, she found herself thinking not about her scheduled patients, but about the conversation she'd had with Grace the night before. This time you can stop it, if you trust what you feel. Kate had always been intuitive. Even as a prosecutor, she'd been known for her ability to read juries, to sense when a witness was lying, to know which arguments would resonate with judges. But since Alex's death, the ability had intensified to something that felt almost supernatural. Her first appointment was Dr. Vincent Shaw, the center's director. A monthly check-in routine and usually brief. But as Kate reviewed her notes from their previous meetings, she noticed something odd. Shaw always asked about specific patients. Not just their progress, but details about their backgrounds, their trauma histories, their particular symptoms. It made sense. He was the director after all. But looking at the pattern of his questions over the past 6 months, Kate realized he showed unusual interest in patients who demonstrated what he called enhanced pattern recognition. Patients like Grace. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Shaw stood in her doorway, impeccably dressed as always in a navy suit and conservative tie. At 58, he was distinguished in the way that inspired trust in patients and donors alike. Silver hair, kind eyes, the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, but comfortable with compassion. Kate, good morning. Do you have a few minutes? Of course, come in. Shaw settled into the chair across from her desk. The same chair where Grace had sat the night before, where she'd warned Kate about losing someone important. I wanted to check in about Grace Rivera, Shaw began. The Hendersons called yesterday expressing some concerns about her ongoing predictions. Kate felt a small warning tingle. What kind of concerns? Apparently, Grace told them that Mrs. Henderson's sister was going to have a heart attack within the week. The sister is only 45 and in good health. The Hendersons are worried that Grace is becoming more delusional, not less. Or, Kate said carefully, Grace is picking up on subtle physical cues that the sister herself might not have noticed yet. Shaw leaned forward, his expression genuinely curious. You really believe Grace has some kind of enhanced ability. I believe trauma can rewire the brain in remarkable ways, that survivors sometimes develop hypervigilance so acute it appears almost psychic. Interesting. Shaw made a note in his tablet. And what about you, Kate? Have you noticed any changes in your own perceptual abilities since Alex died? The question caught Kate off guard. She studied Shaw's face, looking for some indication of why he was asking, but his expression remained professionally neutral. I think grief makes us more sensitive to the emotional states of others, Kate said carefully. Another note. I ask because several of our therapists have reported enhanced intuitive abilities following personal traumas. It's a fascinating pattern. That tingle again stronger now. What kind of pattern? Oh, just observational data. Nothing formal. Shaw smiled, but something in his eyes didn't match the warmth of his expression. Kate, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to participate in a small research study. Very informal, just documenting the correlation between personal trauma and enhanced empathy in caregivers. Kate felt every instinct she possessed screaming warning signals. What would that involve? Just some questionnaires, maybe a few sessions with our neuropsychology team. Dr. Chen has been wanting to expand her research into trauma-related neuroplasticity. Dr. Chen. Rebecca Chen. She joined us last month. Brilliant woman specializes in brain imaging and trauma response. Kate had never heard of Dr. Chen. She thought she knew all the new hires. I'll think about it, Kate said. Wonderful. Shaw stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Kate, if Grace makes any more specific predictions, I'd appreciate it if you could document them. For her file, of course. After Shaw left, Kate sat staring at her closed door. The conversation had felt normal on the surface, but underneath something had been very wrong. The way Shaw had asked about her own abilities, his interest in Grace's predictions, the research study that sounded more like data collection. Kate pulled out her phone and called the main office. Hi, this is Dr. Morrison. Could you transfer me to Dr. Rebecca Chen's office? I'm sorry, Dr. Morrison. We don't have a Dr. Chen on staff. Kate's blood went cold. Are you sure Dr. Shaw mentioned she was a new hire in neuropsychology? Let me double-check. No, ma'am. No Dr. Chen in any department. After hanging up, Kate sat in the growing morning light, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. Shaw's interest in patients with enhanced abilities, his questions about her own intuitive changes, the mysterious Dr. Chen who didn't exist, Grace's warning from the night before, you're going to lose someone else, someone important. What if the threat wasn't some random tragedy? What if it was much more deliberate? Kate reached for her phone to call Grace, but stopped when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Shaw's voice speaking to someone in low, urgent tones. The Morrison woman is becoming suspicious. We may need to accelerate the timeline. Kate's hands went cold. Very carefully, she moved to her door and pressed her ear against the wood. What about the Rivera girl? The second voice was unfamiliar male with a slight accent. She's ready for the next phase. Her abilities are stabilizing nicely. And if Morrison refuses to cooperate... There was a pause. When Shaw spoke again, his voice carried a chilling matter-of-factness. Then we'll have to create the trauma conditions necessary for full activation. It's worked before. Kate backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Create trauma conditions. It worked before. Alex. The thought hit her like lightning. Alex's climbing accident. The equipment failure that should never have happened. What if it hadn't been an accident at all? What if Shaw had been watching her for years, waiting for the right moment to trigger the enhanced intuitive abilities he seemed so interested in studying? Kate grabbed her purse and phone, moving as quietly as possible toward the back exit of the building. She had to get to Grace. She had to warn her. But as she reached for the door handle, it turned from the outside. Shaw stood in the doorway, no longer looking like a compassionate director. Behind him stood two men Kate didn't recognize, wearing the kind of casual clothes that somehow looked like uniforms. Kate, Shaw said gently, I think we need to talk. Kate's training as a prosecutor kicked in immediately. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Look for exits. Dr. Shaw, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I was just heading out for lunch. Shaw's smile was paternal concerned, the same expression he'd worn in board meetings when discussing patient welfare, but his eyes held something else now, something calculating. Kate, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please sit down. Let me explain. The two men behind Shaw moved slightly, blocking the doorway more completely. Kate noticed they wore earpieces, not hospital security, something else entirely. I'd prefer to stand, thank you. Kate! Shaw's voice carried the gentle authority she'd always respected. You're upset. I understand that. Discovery can be overwhelming. Discovery of what? Shaw gestured to the chair she'd vacated. Please, this will be easier if you're sitting. Kate remained standing, every instinct screaming at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The back exit was blocked. Her office had no windows large enough to escape through. 20 years ago, Shaw began settling into Grace's usual chair. You participated in a research study at the University of Colorado. Stress response and intuitive decision-making in legal professionals. Do you remember? Kate did remember. She'd been a third-year law student, eager for the extra credit and the small payment the psychology department had offered. A series of questionnaires and interviews about decision-making under pressure. That study was the beginning of Project Cassandra, Shaw continued, a long-term research initiative designed to identify and cultivate enhanced intuitive abilities in women who've experienced significant trauma. Project Cassandra, named after the Greek prophetess who could see the future but was cursed never to be believed. Shaw's smile was almost fond. We found that certain women, when exposed to the right kind of trauma at the right developmental moments, could develop remarkable abilities, pattern recognition, threat assessment, what some might call precognition. Kate felt sick. You're talking about deliberately traumatizing people. We're talking about unlocking human potential. Kate, do you have any idea how many lives could be saved if we could reliably predict terrorist attacks, natural disasters, market crashes? By torturing women into developing psychic abilities. Shaw's expression hardened slightly. By identifying women who already possess the neurological markers for enhanced intuition, and then providing the catalytic experiences necessary for full manifestation. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Alex, you killed my son. Alex's death was tragic but necessary. You'd shown promise in the initial screenings 20 years ago, but your abilities remained dormant. Sometimes a profound loss is required to break through psychological barriers. Kate lunged toward Shaw, rage overriding caution. The two men moved instantly, restraining her with professional efficiency, not hurting her but making escape impossible. Easy, Dr. Morrison, one of them said. His accent was Eastern European. No one wants to cause additional trauma. Shaw stood smoothing his tie. Kate, I understand your anger, but consider what you've accomplished since Alex died. You saved Linda Hartwell last night. You reconciled with your sister. Your abilities are manifesting beautifully. You sick bastard. 47 women have participated in Project Cassandra over the past 2 decades. They're now working with intelligence agencies, disaster relief organizations, and law enforcement around the world. They're saving thousands of lives. By sacrificing their own families. Shaw was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried genuine regret. Not all of them survived the activation process. Some couldn't integrate the trauma, but those who did, Kate, they've become something remarkable. Kate thought about Grace, about her ability to sense death approaching, about the other patients Shaw had shown unusual interest in. Grace, she whispered. What did you do to Grace? Shaw's expression shifted to something almost paternal. Grace is my daughter. The words hit Kate like ice water. What, my biological daughter? I've been guiding her development since childhood. Controlled exposure to loss, to danger, to the kinds of experiences that forge enhanced abilities. Kate remembered Grace's file, the foster family killed in a gang shooting, the 4 hours Grace had spent listening to the aftermath. You orchestrated the murder of her foster family. I created the conditions necessary for Grace's abilities to fully manifest. She's exceeded every expectation. She's 19 years old. She's the most gifted intuitive we've ever developed. Shaw moved to Kate's desk, picking up a framed photo of Alex. Just as you're becoming the most gifted empath we've ever cultivated. Kate stared at Shaw, trying to reconcile the man she'd worked with for 3 years with the monster standing before her. Why are you telling me this? Because your activation is complete. It's time for the next phase. One of Shaw's associates handed him a tablet. Shaw scrolled through what appeared to be medical files. Project Cassandra is expanding. We've identified over 200 potential candidates across the country, women in their 40s and 50s who show the right neurological markers. We need experienced operatives to help with recruitment and activation. You want me to help you murder people's families. I want you to help me save the world, Kate, by creating a network of women who can see around corners, who can sense danger before it strikes, who can prevent tragedies instead of just responding to them. Shaw turned the tablet toward her. The screen showed photographs of women Kate's age, along with detailed psychological profiles. These women have all experienced significant losses in the past 5 years. Husbands, children, parents. They're already traumatized. We're simply providing the final catalyst needed for their abilities to emerge. Kate scanned the photos. Professional women, mothers, caregivers, women who looked like her patients, like her friends, like herself. And if I refuse, Shaw's smile was gentle and terrible. Then Sarah's cancer treatment will become less effective. These things happen, unfortunately. Medication errors, dosing miscalculations. The threat was delivered with the same tone Shaw used to discuss patient progress in team meetings. Matter of fact, clinical, horrifying in its casual certainty. You're blackmailing me with my sister's life. I'm offering you a choice. Join us willingly, and Sarah receives the best possible care. Refuse and, well, sometimes cancer is simply too aggressive to treat successfully. Kate felt her world tilting. She thought about Sarah, about the reconciliation they'd just begun, about the time they'd thought they had to rebuild their relationship. I need to think about this. Of course. But Kate, Shaw gestured to his associates, for security reasons, you'll need to remain here at the center while you consider your options. You're holding me prisoner. I'm providing you with a safe space to process this information. Your quarters will be comfortable. You'll have access to files about Project Cassandra testimonials from successful operatives. I think you'll find the work quite inspiring. One of Shaw's men approached Kate with what appeared to be a medical syringe. This is just a mild sedative, Shaw explained, to help you rest while you adjust to these revelations. Kate backed away. Don't touch me. Kate, please don't make this more difficult than necessary. That's when the fire alarm went off. The piercing shriek filled the building, accompanied by flashing emergency lights. Shaw's associates immediately moved toward the windows, scanning for threats. Sir, the Eastern European man spoke into his earpiece. We have a building-wide alarm activation. Unknown cause. Shaw's calm expression cracked slightly. Check the security systems. Through the chaos of the alarm, Kate heard something else. A voice young and clear speaking over the building's intercom system. Dr. Shaw, this is Grace Rivera. I think we need to talk. Shaw went pale. How is she accessing the PA system? She's not in her quarters, sir. Shaw's mask of professional composure finally slipped completely. Find her, now. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Shaw's men moved with trained precision, but Kate could sense their growing uncertainty. Grace, Shaw spoke into the darkness. I know you can hear me. This isn't necessary. Come to my office and we can discuss your concerns. Grace's voice came through the speakers again, but now it carried an edge Kate had never heard before. The same way you discussed my foster family's concerns about my behavior. The same way you discussed Alex Morrison's concerns about his climbing equipment. Kate felt something shift in the air around her. The 2 men guarding her were distracted, focused on the corridors beyond her office door. Grace, you don't understand the scope of what we're accomplishing. I understand that you murdered my family. I understand that you killed Dr. Morrison's son. I understand that you've been harvesting traumatized women like livestock. Shaw moved toward Kate's office door. Secure the building, full lockdown protocol. But as he reached for the door handle, Kate heard Grace's voice one more time, not over the speakers, from the hallway outside. Dr. Morrison, when I told you that you were going to lose someone important, I wasn't talking about someone dying. The door opened and Grace stepped inside. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman Kate didn't recognize, mid-40s professional bearing wearing what appeared to be a federal badge. Dr. Shaw, the woman said calmly. Agent Maria Santos, FBI. You're under arrest for conspiracy murder and violations of federal human experimentation laws. Shaw's face went white. Agent Santos, how did you find out about Project Cassandra the same way your other victims found out about each other? through the very network you thought you were controlling. More agents poured into the room, efficiently restraining Shaw's associates. Kate noticed that Agent Santos moved with the same subtle awareness she'd learned to recognize in Grace, the way someone moved when they could sense things others couldn't. "Agent Santos," Kate said quietly. "You're one of them. One of us." Santos nodded grimly. "Project Cassandra operative class of 2019, until I figured out what they'd really done to my family." Shaw was being handcuffed, but his expression remained coldly defiant. "You have no idea what you're destroying," he said to Agent Santos. "The potential we've unlocked, the lives that could be saved." "The only thing I'm destroying," Santos replied, "is a criminal enterprise that murdered innocent people to create weapons." As Shaw was led away, Grace approached Kate. The young woman's face was pale but determined. "Dr. Morrison, are you hurt?" Kate shook her head, still processing everything that had happened. "Grace, how did you know? How did you plan all this?" Grace's smile was sad and proud at the same time. "Because I've been in contact with other Project Cassandra survivors for months. We've been building our own network, one designed to protect people instead of exploit them." "How many others?" Agent Santos answered. 47 women participated in the program over 20 years. 32 survived the activation process. Of those, 18 have joined our counter network. Kate thought about the scope of what Shaw had described. Decades of deliberate trauma, families destroyed to create enhanced abilities. "What happens now?" "Now," Grace said, "we use our abilities the way they were meant to be used, to protect people, to prevent the kind of tragedies that created us in the first place." Santos handed Kate a business card. "Dr. Morrison, we could use someone with your clinical expertise and your newly manifested abilities." Kate looked at the card. It listed Santos as a Special Consultant Intuitive Crimes Task Force. "Is that even a real department?" "It is now. Congress authorized it last month after we provided them with evidence about Project Cassandra and similar programs." Kate thought about Linda Hartwell, about the certainty she'd felt regarding the woman's suicidal intentions, about her reconciliation with Sarah, guided by Grace's warning. "What would I be doing?" "Training other survivors, investigating programs like Cassandra, using your abilities to identify people in crisis before they reach the breaking point." Grace touched Kate's arm gently. "Dr. Morrison, you said healing isn't about returning to who you were before trauma. It's about integrating who you've become." Kate nodded, remembering the conversation they'd had what felt like a lifetime ago. "This is your chance to integrate, to turn what Shaw did to you into something that protects others." Kate looked around her office, the space where she'd spent 3 years helping trauma survivors rebuild their lives, where she'd learned to trust her own intuitive abilities, where she'd discovered that her son's death, while devastating, had awakened something in her that could be used to save others. "I'll need to arrange care for my sister." Santos smiled. "Sarah Morrison is already being transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center. We have doctors there who specialize in treating Project Cassandra family members. She'll receive the best possible care. And Grace will be working with our recruitment team, identifying other survivors who are ready to join the network." Kate thought about Shaw's vision of women traumatized into becoming psychic soldiers. Then she thought about the alternative Grace and Santos were offering, a network of survivors who chose to use their hard-won abilities to protect others. "When do we start?" Grace's smile was bright and fierce. "We already have. Over the next several hours, as FBI teams processed the Willow Creek facility and arrested Shaw's remaining associates, Kate learned the true scope of Project Cassandra. Shaw hadn't been the only administrator. There were facilities in 12 states, all operating under the cover of legitimate trauma treatment centers. Hundreds of women had been targeted over the past 2 decades. Their families destroyed, their lives shattered, all to unlock abilities that Shaw and his colleagues believed could be weaponized. But the survivors had been building something else. A counter-network of women who used their enhanced intuition to identify others in danger, to prevent tragedies instead of causing them, to heal instead of harvest. The irony, Agent Santos explained as they sat in Kate's office reviewing files, is that Shaw was right about one thing. These abilities are remarkable, but he completely misunderstood how they work. "What do you mean enhancement through trauma isn't about creating soldiers? It's about creating healers." Women who've survived the worst human experience has to offer, and who've learned to sense when others are approaching that same edge. Grace nodded. That's why your abilities work so well with patients, Dr. Morrison. You can sense their emotional states because you've been where they are. Kate thought about her work over the past 18 months. The uncanny accuracy of her diagnoses, her ability to connect with patients who'd been resistant to other therapists. So what Shaw saw as weapon manufacturing was actually creating the most empathetic, intuitive healers the world has ever seen, Santos finished. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Kate stood in her office window, watching FBI vehicles departing with evidence and suspects. Tomorrow, she would drive to Denver to see Sarah to explain what had really happened to their family. Next week, she would begin training with the Intuitive Crimes Task Force. But tonight, she simply stood with Grace and Agent Santos, 3 women who'd survived unimaginable trauma and found a way to transform their pain into protection for others. Dr. Morrison, Grace said quietly, I have one more prediction. What's that? Grace's smile was peaceful and confident. You're going to save a lot of people. Not because of what Shaw did to you, but because of who you chose to become afterward. Kate thought about Alex, about the voicemail she'd been too busy to answer, about the call she'd failed to take when someone she loved needed her most. She would never stop grieving that failure, but she would also never stop answering the call when someone else needed saving. 6 months later, Kate stood in the conference room of a nondescript federal building in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of women who shared a terrible bond. 43 Project Cassandra survivors had gathered for the first official meeting of the Intuitive Crimes Task Force. Each woman had lost someone. Each woman had developed abilities that seemed impossible. And each woman had made the choice to transform their trauma into a tool for protecting others. Before we begin, Kate said, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned as a prosecutor and refined as a therapist, I want us to take a moment to acknowledge what brought us here. The room fell silent. Kate could feel the weight of collective grief, but also something else. Strength, purpose. The kind of solidarity that emerged when survivors chose to stand together instead of suffer alone. We are here because someone decided our pain was acceptable collateral damage for their vision of a better world. Because someone believed they had the right to murder our families to unlock our potential. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. But we are also here because we survived, because we refused to let their crimes define us, and because we've chosen to use the abilities that emerged from our darkest moments to ensure that no one else has to endure what we endured. Kate looked out at faces that reflected every background, every age, every walk of life. The one thing they had in common was the look in their eyes, the particular awareness that came from having stared into the abyss and chosen to climb back toward the light. Agent Santos approached the podium. Over the past 6 months, she'd become the de facto leader of the Survivor Network, coordinating with federal agencies to identify and shut down facilities similar to Willow Creek. Ladies, I'm pleased to report that Project Cassandra is officially terminated. The last facility was closed yesterday in Maine. All administrative personnel are in federal custody. Applause filled the room, but it was subdued. Victory felt complicated when it came at such a high price. Dr. Shaw and his colleagues are facing life sentences for murder, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity. Their convictions are setting legal precedents that will prevent similar programs from ever operating again. Kate thought about Shaw, about the man who'd murdered her son, and called it scientific progress. She felt no satisfaction in his imprisonment. Justice for the dead couldn't bring them back. More importantly, Santos continued, we've identified 37 additional survivors from related programs. They're being offered the same choice we were given: use your abilities to heal or receive support to live quietly with your experiences. Grace stood from her seat in the front row. Over the past months, she'd become the network's most effective recruiter, using her abilities to locate and connect with other survivors. Dr. Morrison, would you share our success statistics? Kate opened her tablet, reviewing data that still amazed her. In 6 months of operation, task force members have prevented 47 suicides, identified 31 domestic violence situations before they became fatal, and provided early warning for 12 natural disasters and 3 terrorist plots. The room erupted in genuine applause this time. These were lives saved, tragedies prevented, families kept intact. We've also established support groups in 18 cities, for family members of survivors, providing counseling and resources for people whose loved ones are learning to navigate enhanced abilities. Kate thought about Sarah, who was responding well to treatment at Walter Reed. The cancer was in remission, and their relationship had grown stronger than it had ever been. Sarah was attending family support meetings, learning to understand and accept Kate's abilities rather than fear them. The question before us today, Kate continued, is how we move forward. We've proven that our abilities can be used constructively. Now we need to decide how to formalize and expand our work. Agent Santos returned to the podium. The Department of Homeland Security has offered to create an official intuitive threat assessment division. We would have federal authority funding and resources to prevent the kinds of tragedies we've all experienced. What would that look like practically? Asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a survivor from the Chicago facility. Teams of 2 or 3 operatives assigned to different regions. You'd work with local law enforcement, social services, and medical personnel to identify people in crisis. Think of it as preventive mental health intervention on a national scale. Kate felt the familiar tingle of intuition. This was right. This was what their abilities were meant for. There would be safeguards, Santos continued. Oversight committees, regular psychological evaluations, rotation schedules to prevent burnout, and always the choice to step back if the work becomes too overwhelming. A woman named Patricia stood up from the back of the room. Kate recognized her from the files, a former nurse whose husband and daughter had died in a random car accident that Shaw's team had orchestrated. What about the families we lost, the people who died so we could develop these abilities? The room fell silent. It was the question they all carried, the guilt that shadowed every success. Kate stood drawing on 20 years of helping people process impossible loss. Patricia, nothing we do will bring them back. No amount of lives saved will balance the scales for the lives we lost. But Kate paused, thinking about Alex, about the last voicemail she'd never answered. But I think our loved ones would want their deaths to mean something. I think they'd want us to prevent other families from experiencing what we experienced. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of women who'd lost everything and found a way to keep going. We can't save the people we lost, but we can save the people who are still here. Patricia sat down, tears streaming down her face. Around the room, other women were crying too. Not from sadness, but from the recognition that they'd found a way to honor their dead while serving the living. Grace approached the podium, her voice clear and strong. I'd like to share something I've learned about prediction, about seeing the future. The room's attention focused on the young woman who'd survived more manipulation than any of them. For most of my life, I've seen death approaching people. I've seen endings, conclusions, the moments when hope runs out. It made me feel helpless, like I was cursed to witness tragedies I couldn't prevent. Grace looked directly at Kate. But working with Dr. Morrison taught me something. The future isn't fixed. The things I see are possibilities, not certainties. And when we act on what we sense, when we trust our abilities and use them to help others, we can change those possibilities. Kate felt tears in her eyes. Grace had grown so much over the past months, transforming from a traumatized teenager into a confident young woman who understood the true power of her gifts. So yes, Grace continued, I vote we formalize our network. I vote we accept federal support and expand our reach. Because every person we save represents a future we changed, a tragedy we prevented, a family that gets to stay together. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting broke up into smaller planning sessions, Kate found herself standing on the building's roof, looking out over the Washington skyline. The autumn air was crisp, reminding her of Colorado, of the mountains she'd left behind to take on this new role. Grace joined her along with Agent Santos and several other women who'd become the informal leadership of their group. Are you okay, Dr. Morrison? Grace asked. Kate nodded, though she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were undertaking. I keep thinking about something Shaw said, about the women who didn't survive the activation process. What about them? He said not all of them could integrate the trauma. Some couldn't handle what was done to them. Kate looked at the women around her, survivors who'd found a way to transform their worst experiences into their greatest strengths. What made the difference? What made us different from the ones who didn't make it? Agent Santos was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. I think the difference was connection. The women who survived were the ones who found ways to connect with others, who refused to let trauma isolate them completely. Shaw's mistake, Grace added, was thinking trauma automatically creates ability, but trauma alone just creates damage. Ability comes from healing, from integration, from choosing to grow around the pain instead of being consumed by it. Kate thought about her own journey, the months after Alex died when she'd withdrawn from everyone, the slow process of learning to trust her intuitive abilities, the moment when she'd chosen to use those abilities to help Linda Hartwell instead of doubting them. We didn't develop these abilities in spite of our trauma, Kate realized. We developed them because of how we chose to heal from our trauma. Grace smiled. Exactly. And that's why what we're building will work, because it's based on healing, not harvesting. As the sun set over Washington, Kate felt a familiar sensation. The tingle of intuition, the sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. But this time the feeling wasn't warning her about danger. It was telling her about hope. 3 years later, Kate stood in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee delivering the annual report on the Intuitive Threat Assessment Division's work. In 36 months of operation, she read from her prepared statement, ITAD teams have prevented over 2,000 suicides, identified and stopped 47 domestic terrorism plots, and provided early warning for 63 natural disasters. The senators looked impressed, but Kate knew the real measure of their success couldn't be captured in statistics. More importantly, we've created a model for trauma recovery that's being implemented in treatment centers across the country. The principle that trauma can be transformed into service, that survivors can become protectors, is revolutionizing how we approach mental health treatment. After the hearing, Kate drove to Walter Reed to visit Sarah, who was now 2 years cancer-free and volunteering with the Family Support Program. How did it go? Sarah asked as they sat in the hospital's garden. They're approving funding for expansion. We'll be able to add 50 new operatives and establish centers in 12 additional cities. Sarah smiled. Alex would be proud. Kate felt the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of her son. Time had dulled the sharpest edges of grief, but the loss remained a constant presence. I think about him every day, Kate said. About the call I didn't answer. Kate, but I also think about all the calls I have answered since then. All the people who needed help and got it, because I learned to trust what I was feeling. Sarah took her sister's hand. That's healing, isn't it? Not forgetting the pain, but using it to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Kate nodded, thinking about the 43 women who'd gathered in that D.C. conference room 3 years ago. Most were still with the program, still using their abilities to protect others. Some had chosen to step back to live quietly with their gifts. All had found ways to honor their losses while serving the living. Grace approached across the garden, now 22, and serving as the program's training director. She'd finished her degree in psychology and was working on a doctorate in trauma-induced neuroplasticity. Dr. Morrison, I wanted to let you know. We got confirmation that the Richards family is safe. Kate smiled. The Richards case had been one of their most challenging. A father struggling with PTSD who'd been escalating toward violence against his family. It had taken 3 months of careful intervention to connect him with appropriate treatment and ensure his wife and children's safety. He's responding well to therapy. Very well. And Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Richards wanted me to give you this. Grace handed Kate a handwritten letter. Inside, Kate found a photo of the Richards family, parents and 3 young children all smiling. The note read, Dr. Morrison, I don't know how you knew my husband was in crisis, but your intervention saved our family. My children still have their father, and I still have my husband. Thank you for seeing what we couldn't see, and for caring enough to act on it. Kate felt tears in her eyes. This was why they did the work. Not for recognition or statistics, but for moments like this. Families kept together. Children who got to grow up with both parents. Tragedies prevented before they could unfold. Grace, Kate said, do you still see death approaching people? Grace considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but I see other things now too. I see hope approaching. I see healing beginning. I see people finding the strength to ask for help. And the network, how many survivors are we connected with now? Over 300 across 17 countries. It turns out Shaw's program wasn't unique, but neither is our response to it. Survivors everywhere are learning that they can transform their trauma into protection for others. Kate thought about the future, about the possibilities that Grace and others like her could sense approaching. It wouldn't be perfect. There would always be tragedies they couldn't prevent, people they couldn't save, families they couldn't keep together. But there would also be moments like this. Letters from grateful families. Children who grew up safe because someone had sensed danger and acted to prevent it. Survivors who learned that their worst experiences could become the source of their greatest contributions. As the three women sat together in the hospital garden, Kate felt that familiar, intuitive certainty. They were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. Their loved ones were gone. The trauma that had awakened their abilities could never be undone. But the healing they'd found, the purpose they'd discovered, the lives they were saving, that was real too. And sometimes Kate realized that was enough. Epilogue. 5 years after the formation of the Intuitive Threat Assessment Division, Kate stood at the podium of the International Conference on Trauma and Recovery, looking out at an audience of therapists, researchers, and survivors from around the world. When we talk about post-traumatic growth, she began, we're not talking about forgetting the pain or pretending that trauma is a gift. We're talking about the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to transform suffering into service. In the front row, Grace sat with Elena Whitehorse, Kate's Cherokee grandmother, who'd flown in from the reservation in Oklahoma. At 74, Elena was finally sharing the stories of her own intuitive abilities, stories that had been dismissed for decades as superstition. Indigenous communities have always understood what Western psychology is just beginning to recognize, Kate continued. That profound loss can awaken profound wisdom. That survivors often develop abilities that seem impossible, but are actually expressions of the deepest forms of human connection. Agent Santos, now Director of Global Intuitive Services, smiled from her seat in the second row. The program had expanded to 6 continents, connecting survivors and preventing tragedies on a scale none of them had imagined possible. But perhaps most importantly, Kate said, we've learned that healing is not a destination, it's a practice. Every day, survivors make the choice between bitterness and growth, between isolation and connection, between despair and hope. Kate thought about Shaw still serving his life sentence in federal prison. She'd received a letter from him 6 months ago, a rambling attempt at justification for Project Cassandra. She'd read it once and then destroyed it. His vision of traumatized women as weapons had been proven wrong by every life the survivors had saved. The women of the Intuitive Threat Assessment Division have prevented over 10,000 tragedies in 5 years of operation. But their greatest achievement isn't in the lives they've saved. It's in the model they've created for transforming trauma into purpose. As Kate concluded her presentation, she felt the familiar sensation of intuitive certainty. This work would continue long after she was gone. Grace and others like her would carry it forward, finding new ways to use their abilities to protect and heal. After the conference, Kate returned to her hotel room to find a voicemail from Linda Hartwell, the woman whose life Kate had saved on her first night of trusting her intuition. Dr. Morrison, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted you to know that I'm celebrating 5 years of choosing life instead of death. 5 years since you somehow knew I was in crisis and gave me the resources to ask for help. I've started volunteering with a suicide prevention hotline, and I often think about the ripple effects of your intervention that night. How many lives you saved by saving mine. Kate smiled, thinking about ripple effects. Alex's death had awakened abilities that led to Shaw's arrest, which led to the formation of ITAD, which led to thousands of prevented tragedies. The mathematics of trauma and healing were complex, but the direction was clear. Pain transformed into purpose. Loss transformed into love. Ending transformed into beginning. Kate's phone buzzed with a text from Grace Dr. Morrison. I'm sensing something wonderful approaching. Not sure what yet, but it feels like the kind of beginning that changes everything. See you at the airport tomorrow. Kate packed her bags, thinking about new beginnings. At 57, she was still learning, still growing, still discovering the depths of what human beings could accomplish when they chose healing over hatred. The flight back to Colorado gave Kate time to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she'd been a broken woman, drowning in guilt over her son's death. Now she was part of a global network of survivors who'd learned to transform their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. As the plane descended toward Denver, Kate thought about Alex, about the voicemail she'd never answered, about the call that had changed everything. She would always carry the grief of that loss, but she would also carry the knowledge that his death had awakened something in her that had saved thousands of lives. It wasn't balance. It wasn't justice. It wasn't fair, but it was healing. And sometimes Kate had learned healing was enough. Grace met her at the airport, smiling with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found her purpose in the world. "Welcome home, Dr. Morrison." Kate looked at the young woman who'd become both student and teacher survivor and healer. Grace had been right about so many things, including the most important thing of all. That love was stronger than trauma. That connection was more powerful than isolation. And that the future, no matter how dark it sometimes seemed, always held the possibility of hope. "It's good to be home," Kate said. Together they walked toward the exit, two women who'd survived the unthinkable and found a way to ensure that others wouldn't have to. Behind them, the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Ahead of them lay the continuing work of healing a broken world, one prevented tragedy at a time. The work would never be finished, but it would always be worth doing, and they would never stop answering the call. The end. Thank you for following Kate and Grace's incredible journey from trauma to triumph. This story proves that women's intuition isn't just a feeling, it's a superpower that can save lives when we learn to trust it. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about the extraordinary strength of ordinary women. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had an intuitive moment that changed everything? Because your story matters too.